my dad said, I'm from Haiti. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here with you tonight. I have to say, I was given absolutely zero guideline on what to say. My parents wrote and asked if I wanted to speak here, and I was like, sure, what do you want me to talk about? And they were like, missions. And I was like, okay, that's not really helpful. But what I'm actually just gonna do tonight is share my heart with you, because like my dad said, I do have a different perspective, and these last few years living in Canada have been, reverse culture shock, and I have found myself asking, like, my purpose and fulfillment. I've found myself asking those questions a lot. Before we get into why I believe that each one of us here has been called to ministry of some kind, I just want to share a bit about myself and my background and where my passion for missions started. So, I moved down to Haiti when I was 6 months old, and my parents started and were involved in so many different ministries during our time there. For a family, I'm the youngest of 5 kids, so I was a surprise. I was born 10 years after the youngest sibling in my family. So yeah. One of the ministries that we had in Haiti was our wedding ministry. It was probably the most fulfilling ministry that we did. In Haiti, it's cultural that unless you can have a wedding dress and a suit and you can have a reception and invite your friends and family, you're actually not allowed to be married. And so this turned out that so many couples would be living in sin because they wanted to be married so badly, but they didn't have the funds to do so. And so we actually had people from North America donate their old wedding dresses and equipment that they used to be married. They would donate it to us, and then we would go out to these very remote villages, sometimes by donkey, and we would take these supplies, and we would coordinate with the pastor of the churches there and help these people be married. Usually around 25 to sometimes, one time we did 71 couples in one day we married. It's pretty amazing. So we would go out and help marry these people, and the following day they would come back and they would return the dresses to us, and at that point they would tell us their testimonies. And it was amazing because they would express that literal chains were broken off of them being married now, because at that point then they could go and they could baptize their kids in the church, they could have their children dedicated. There was one couple in particular I remember very well. They had to be in their 80s or late 70s. And when they finally got married, at their wedding, they had their 12 children and 17 grandchildren who got to witness their wedding that day. So it was really rewarding, and God blessed that ministry so much. It was such a unique thing that we were able to do. Another ministry we did was our Sunday school, and it is the top right photo up there. We started when I was about 5. My dad would drive his motorbike around the countryside when we first got to Haiti, and he noticed that in churches, a lot of children, usually naked or very poor, would be sitting outside the churches because, again, culturally, it wasn't acceptable for people to go to church unless they had proper shoes and clothes and did their hair properly, so it was a status thing. So my parents felt that they should start this ministry that would enable children to be able to come and learn about God as they were. So we started this. The first week there were a few hundred kids that came. By the time that we finished and left Haiti, there were over 2,000 kids that came to our Sunday school each week. And when my parents started, we felt we couldn't go and minister to these slum kids without giving them some kind of food to take with them throughout the week. So we gave them manna packs, which are a small bag of rice, and it would feed around 4 to 6 people, and sometimes that was their only meal for that entire week. So one last ministry that we did, I will mention, is our sports camp. It was basically a Disneyland for Haitians. We had so many unique things there. We had 8 water slides that were made out of cement. We had a zip line. We had one of the only gymnasiums in all of the country. The kids that got to come to this camp were mostly our slum kids. We would have about 200 kids come each week during the summer. And it was the best week of their lives. A huge experience for them. Like, they would come to us and they would ask, okay, when can we shower? Because showering was such a big experience for them. They were only used to bathing in the river, and so having running water was like a huge, huge thing. And so the purpose of this camp was to teach kids and young adults how to properly use the internet, because it was rapidly spreading throughout the country. And it was to teach them, give them tools, and teach them how to live in a way that's God-honoring. And it was just a beautiful ministry that also God just completely blessed while we were there. So, why am I telling you this? These stories are just a very small glimpse into what we did in Haiti and how my passion for ministry began to emerge. When I came back to Canada, I questioned purpose and fulfillment so much because I lived a life that was purpose-led every day. I woke up and I knew what a fulfilled life looked like. I knew what it was to live in a place where God had so evidently wanted me to be. There were challenges, obviously. There was an attempted kidnapping on my life. There was, we were almost stoned at Sunday school. Our car tires were slashed. There was one time when my dad and I were driving into town, and there was a roadblock, which was pretty frequent. It was when men or people would roll out these tires into the middle of the road, and they would set them on fire when they were angry. And so we came upon this roadblock, and all of a sudden, in like 20 seconds, there were about 15 young guys crawling on our car with these rocks the size of my head. And I went, this doesn't seem like a very good situation. But we got out of it. And honestly, I remember having so much peace because throughout my life, I knew that we couldn't live one day without God's provision and protection. And this is such a good lesson for us because as Christians, we are guaranteed to face trials from this world of so many different kinds. We need to have faith that is greater than our fear of man. My dad always said, to be in the center of God's will, or there's no safer place to be than in the center of God's will. This is so true. You can be in the safest neighborhood ever, or doing what you think is safe, and you can be in a more dangerous situation than in a third world country if God is not on your side. So to continue my story, let's fast forward to 2021. In a matter of 40 seconds, my entire life changed. An earthquake happened. I want to say it was like a 7.8 magnitude earthquake, and it destroyed our entire camp. I was actually in the gym coaching 80 boys at the time, and at first I didn't really realize what was happening because there were boys running around, and all of a sudden I saw the wall completely split in half, and I was like, okay, wow. And so we ran out of there like you wouldn't believe, and I watched as basically our entire campus just fell to the ground. Buildings collapsed. It was about 50 seconds, and everything that my dad had worked for the past 12 years was just gone. So you can imagine that there was a lot of time to reflect and just ask God, what is going on? Amidst this, there was so much peace. A peace knowing that this was a new beginning for us, undoubtedly, and that God still had so much in plan for us in store. So we actually came back to Canada. That is where we're from. I am from Canada. So we moved back and we lived in my sister's basement for the while. It was kind of nearing the end of COVID, so we still had to isolate. During this time, I hated it. It was so horrible for me. I went back to this place where all of a sudden there was like zero purpose. I went from serving and ministering and doing all of these amazing things that God clearly was in, and then I came back to this country where faith seemed dead, and I was so depressed. I was just so sad. So I actually, in a sense, ran away, and I went to Cape and Wray in Spain for 3 months, where it was such a good experience for me to kind of unpack my experiences. And then that whole year, I got the opportunity to do different missions trips. I went to Peru for a couple weeks, and I went to Vietnam for a month, and I learned the different ways to do ministry. And during this year, my passion for serving people and for ministry just grew so much. I realized that that is what God had placed on my life, the calling. So after that year of ministry, of serving, of doing all these things, I decided to attend Columbia Bible College in Canada. And I went there for 2 years, and during my first year especially, I questioned my purpose almost daily. It was a very hard transition to go from, the life of service that I knew to just this life that I was in now. It felt like any effort that I had tried to do to lead or to make CBC a better place, it couldn't ever compare to what I used to do. And so a lot of times my efforts felt useless. I always wanted to be somewhere else. I thought that if I chased mission work in other places that I would feel fulfilled, but I really just lacked contentment with where I was. And it wasn't that long ago, less than a year probably, that God really opened my eyes on a new perspective to ministry, which is why I believe that all of us are called to ministry, whether overseas or in our own town, because I think that we are placed here as lights, and we can do a good job of being an example of who God is. Wherever God allows us to be, there is purpose. It's the idea of grow where you're planted. And God puts you somewhere, use that to the fullest. So there's a few questions. I want to get into the biblical calling to missions. Why do we do missions? And it's a pretty simple answer. Jesus commands us to. Literally. The Great Commission. Matthew 28:18-20 says, "Then Jesus came to them and said, 'All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age.'" It's pretty clear. Jesus has all the authority and power and is commissioning us to go and tell these people about him. We need to be lights in this very dark world because we have a hope that isn't dependent on things that happen here on earth. Mark 16:15 says, "And he said to them, 'Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation.'" With work, with school, with friends, we can be lights. It doesn't matter if we are across the world or in our own homes. We can make a difference. A few questions we can reflect on. Why do we do missions? We just talked about that. What does the Bible say about missions? Missions is actually central to the Bible's teaching. In Acts 1:8, it says, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." I believe actually that this is very applicable to, when it says Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth, I think it can be referring to in your town, in the next town, and to the ends of the earth, where some of us are called to different places and to different things. And that is a blessing, because if we were all called to be missionaries in third world countries, there would be nobody to be missionaries here. And 1 Peter 2:9 says, "You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellences of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." We lived in darkness before Jesus came. If we look at the lives of the disciples, we can see that they actually couldn't wait to tell people about Jesus. They recognized that they had been living in such a dark place, and then when Jesus came to save them, they had then been exposed to God's goodness and light. We need to exemplify that as his disciples do. Just like the song that we just sung, "With every breath I will sing of the goodness of God. What stops people from doing missions? John 10, verse 10 says, "The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that you may have life and have it to the full." The enemy of comfort has been something that I've felt very convicted of lately. We live in a very comfortable society. I think a lot of time comfort actually keeps us from growth. When we do things that just don't get us out of our comfort zone, it's keeping us from God's will, which is a very scary thought. I often think of the story of Esther when, if she had have stayed in her comfort zone and not gone to the king to plead on behalf of her people could have died. God would have chosen somebody else, but she would have died because God would have chosen somebody else. And so when we stay in our comfort zone and we actually don't act on the call of God, He's just going to use somebody else. And that is scary. The last question, what does it mean to be on mission? Matthew 16, 24, 25. "If anyone wishes to follow me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." When we seek the kingdom of heaven first, all of these other things in life will be added to you. My parents are the perfect example of this. They have sought God's kingdom for so many years and only cared about the things of God, and now God has blessed them beyond measure, and they have, an amazing life because of that. A kingdom mindset means putting God first, not our worldly desires. The last point I have is application. And this is a call to take part. Isaiah 6:8 says, "And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?' Then I said, 'Here I am, send me.'" I've noticed that for many churches today, evangelism and going on missions is optional. But having a kingdom mindset actually does not mean that those things are optional. We are placed on this earth for one reason, and that is to make God known. Also in James 1, 16, 18, it talks about that we are actually supposed to be God's first fruits. Us as believers, we are to give our lives as a complete and total sacrifice to make God known and to bring glory to Him. So we should have the heart posture of serving God in a way that we are lights to Him. That is pretty much all I have.